The lesson topic for this video is writing polynomial equations, and this is going to be done by using the graph. So just so you know, these are the level 2 types of questions you will see for your assessment. Alright, and here are the steps we're going to take to write the equation. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our graph and we're going to find our x-intercepts. Okay, so we have an x-intercept right here where it crosses the x-axis. That would be at -1, 2, 3, so -3. And then our next one is right here at -1. And we've got one more over here at 2. So there's our x-intercepts. Now we're going to rewrite our x-intercepts in factored form. And if you jump directly to this step, that is fine. Alright, so we're going to write them as factors. Now remember, what we're really doing is we're kind of reversing, typically what we would use here to get our x-intercepts would be the zero product property. So we'd set this equal to 0 to get this. So if you think about it that way, we know that this needs to be x plus 3. Because if I subtracted 3 from both sides, I would get -3 for my x-intercept. The next one then will be x plus 1, so I can get -1 as an x-intercept, and then x minus 2 in order to get 2 as my x-intercept. Now, there's a little note here, make sure you pay attention to this. Remember to put an exponent on any factor or 0 with multiplicity. So if any of these are double zeros or triple zeros, we need to put a 2 or a 3 right here. So let's determine if they're single, double, or triple from the graph. If it goes straight through the graph, it's a single 0. There's no bouncing and there's no flattening out. Same thing here, straight through and straight through. So these are all single zeros. Now we're going to set up an equation using a as a variable for the leading coefficient, because we're pretty close to writing the equation here, but we don't have y equals and the a value, the leading coefficient, in the front. Okay, so I'm going to write my equation y equals a times x plus 3 times x plus 1 times x minus 2. Now, we're going to plug in a point that we know, and we're going to solve for a. Typically, I will provide a point for you in the graph. If I don't, you find your own. All right, now, the one that I provided right here is the y-intercept, and that makes it work out pretty handy, and I'll show you why. So we have 0, 12 is our point there. 0, 12 is that point, right? So we're going to go ahead and plug a 0 in for x and a 12 in for y. And again, that's pretty helpful because the zeros are going to make the work pretty easy. So y, we're going to put 12. We're going to put 0 in, make that red, a 0 in for x. We're going to put a 0 in for x here. We're going to put a 0 in for x here. All right, and now we're going to simplify and we're going to solve for a. All right, so this is 12 equals a. 0 plus 3 is 3. 0 plus 1 is 1. 0 minus 2 is -2. Okay? Now on the right-hand side, we simplify this by doing 3 times 1 times -2. So, sorry, ignoring this line here. So 12 equals a times 3 times 1 times -2, which is -6. Well, if we have a times -6, to solve for a, we need to undo the multiplication that's being done right here. So we need to divide both sides by -6. And we find out that a is -2. Now don't forget, there's one last step to write the equation, and we need to do that. We have to write the equation. So step 5, we're going to write the equation. Now we're not going to include the 12, okay, in our final equation, because 12 was just a specific point we used to find a. So we write y equals -2, because that's our a value that we found right here, times x plus 3 times x plus 1 times x minus 2. And there's our equation from our graph. Okay, let's try this example. Write the equation of the polynomial shown on the graph. Okay, so the steps aren't listed, but remember that we start by listing our x-intercepts. So we've got one at -2, 0, 1, and 2. All right, -2, 0, 1, and 2. The next step that we had was that we are going to write them as factors. Now remember, when you write them as a factor, the -2 x-intercept will go in as a factor as x plus 2, because we use the zero product property to arrive at the -2. The next one is x plus 0. We're going to talk about what happens with that in a little bit. And then this one is x minus 1, and then this one is x minus 2. After we write our factors, we are going to need to find our a value. So if we want to just go ahead and write y equals a times all of those factors, we can. Now let me back up one step. I did forget something, and this is very important. So the fact that I forgot it is not good. And that is, after you list your factors, your 4 factors, in this case, you have to decide if any of them are double or triple zeros. In this case, none of them are, which I knew, which is why I knew we didn't need any numbers here, but make sure you always look for that. If you miss that, it will end up being the wrong equation. All right, now we need to pick a point on the polynomial graph that we can put in the x value for x and the corresponding y value for y so that we can solve for a. Last time we used our y-intercept, there was a dot on the graph, and this time our y-intercept is also our x-intercept, so it will not work to help us find a. So instead we're going to use this point down here, which is at -1, -18. All right, -1, -18. So we're going to go ahead and put -1 in, -18 in for the y here, and I'm going to put a -1 in for my x's. So -18 equals a times -1 plus 2, and then -1 plus 0, and then -1 minus 1, and -1 minus 2. Put -1 in for every x value, variable. Now we'll simplify everything in parentheses. So we still have this -18 equals a, sorry, my equal sign, there we go. -1 plus 2 is 1. -1 plus 0 is -1. -1 minus 1 is -2. And -1 minus 3 is -3. So we will simplify all the multiplication on the right-hand side of the equation. So -18 equals a times 1 times -1 times -2 times -3 will end up being -6. All right. Then we are going to go ahead and divide both sides by -6, which will help us solve and get our a value. So a equals 3. And our last step then, after we find out what the a value is we do need to write the equation as a final step. So y equals 3 times x plus 2 times x plus 0 times x minus 1 times x minus 2. Now, there's actually one more step you should take. If you don't, this is not a wrong answer. But let's think back to this x plus 0 right here. Well, what is x plus 0? Well, it's x. We don't, if we add 0, we're not changing it at all. So we're going to get y equals 3x, and then x plus 2, and then x minus 1, and then x minus 2. Again, we take that x plus 0 factor and realize it's just x, which means we'd bring it out to the front here, and this would be our best answer right here. Okay, why don't you try this one on your own? Be careful. There is going to be a double or triple zero in this example, so make sure you include that with your factor and then check back to see how you did. Okay, so as you got started, I hope you found the x-intercepts to be -4 and -2. And then, very, very important here, make sure that you included a squared on the x plus 2 factor, because there is a bounce right here, and a bounce means it's a double zero. If you don't have that, try finishing up this problem with that 2 there, because otherwise it is not correct. Also, I did not include a obvious point to use for your x and y in order to solve for a. When there isn't a point, look to see that for the y-intercept and use that as long as it's not at 0, 0. Okay, so I use the point 0, 8, which is the y-intercept. I put an 8 in for y, and I put then zeros in for x, which just makes it a little bit easier to compute. All right, so then what we're going to get here is we're going to have 8 equals a times 0 plus 4, which is 4, times 0 plus 2, which is 2, squared. Now you need to make sure you use that 2 squared correctly as we continue simplifying. 8 equals a times 4 times 2 squared, which is 4. All right, we get 8 equals a times 4, which is 16. And be very careful here. When you divide both sides by 16, the answer is not 2. All right, the 16s cancel. We get a equals 8 over 16. What is 8 over 16? Well, that would simplify to 1 over 2. Not 2, but 1/2. So a is 1/2. So now we need to write our final equation. We're going to get y equals 1/2, goes in for a. We have x plus 4, and we have x plus 2 squared. How'd you do?